a therapist. It's amazing when someone greeted me after the first service and they said, "Oh, when I heard you were a therapist, I thought this would be worse." Which is always like, I was like, oh, my reputation precedes me. Thank you very much. But no, so to get us started off correctly, so when I was 3, my parents split up, which professionally speaking is actually the most awkward way to greet a group of people you're meeting for the first time. So it feels a little bit like when I tell people at dinner parties what I do for a living. So when someone comes, oh, I'm in sales. What do you do? Oh, I'm a pastor and a therapist. It's amazing how quickly everyone needs to go to the restroom, right? It's like they're all afraid that I'm going to baptize them or tell them their dads never loved them, whichever comes first in that scenario, right? Yeah, it's kind of a tough gig sometimes. So, but as I was reflecting on what we might explore together when Dave asked me to come hang out with y'all, I thought, is there a biblical text that either equals or exceeds the level of awkwardness that I'm already just pumping out into the atmosphere as a human? Turns out, friends, the Lord, as he is accustomed to doing, always provides. So we're going to be in 2 Kings, which is, your favorite book and mine, chapter 2, verses 23 through 25. And if you don't have it handy on your app or in a concrete form of a book, I have it on the screen for you. So here we go. He, in this passage, is our friend Elisha, and he's on his way to Bethel. So here we go. Elisha went up from there to Bethel, and while he was going up on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him, as they are wont to do, saying, "Go away, bald head. Go away, bald head." Gosh, it's just the most unoriginal content here. When he turned around and saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 she-bears, not one, 2 she-bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. From there, he went on to Mount Carmel and then returned to Samaria. And with that, I'd like to close this in prayer. Thanks, you've been. But yeah, no, when Jake said that your kids, the best part about this place is that your kids are learning the same thing you are. It's going to be a great Sunday for you at lunch. It's really going to be wonderful. Yeah, no, so anyway, gosh, man, I can't decide what I like most about this passage. Just the casual nature of it all. I mean, that it concludes with some sort of TripAdvisor information there. Then from there, he went on to Mount Carmel and then returned to Samaria. I suppose after washing his hands, I'm not sure what happens next. But so one of my favorite parts about all of this, about being what Maya Angelou called not just a Christian, but a practicing one, is that we are actually encouraged to read from this book as regular devotional material. Right? So when people come to me, as they sometimes do, and say, the Bible is boring or irrelevant or outdated, my response is usually something along the lines of, friends, the Bible may be a lot of things, inexplicably in the drawer of your side table in your hotel room, for instance, but irrelevantly boring isn't one of them. The problem is just that for most of us growing up, we weren't taught to read deeply from this source. Instead, we were encouraged to stay on the well-marked path laid out by all those helpful maps of St. Paul's missionary journeys through Asia Minor that were in like every cinder block classroom of Sunday school in all of my growing up years. Can I get a witness for Brother Paul and his travel itinerary? Anybody else know what I'm talking about here? Yeah, right on. We always knew where he was going. It was so very helpful for us. So this morning, I'd like to do something a bit different. I'd like to argue that the whole point of exploring the Bible isn't to become so familiar with the greatest hits that we don't even bother to read them or honestly anything else from it anymore, but to seek out the frayed edges, the she-bears, weird boils, deep cuts, and downright biblical weirdness in order to ask this question. Next slide, please. Out of all of the stories available to history, like all of them, why did this one make the cut? How did she-bears end up on the album, is what I'm asking. What is the divine teaching us about what it means to be human in the midst of all this chaos and violence that we read in his source material? So I found, though, that when we actually read widely from the Bible, instead of discovering mostly fortune cookie platitudes disconnected from actual human life, it's this thing that's profoundly interested in helping us uncover eyes to see and ears to hear God in the most unexpectedly brutal moments of our lives. The Bible gets you, man. Remarkably. So, which brings me back to my parents splitting up. So, my mom remarried when I was around 5, and because there is a law governing such arrangements, her new husband became my legal stepfather. And for the preceding 25 years or so, we settled into what could be described as a fairly amicable misunderstanding of one another. Namely because I wanted him to be something or someone that he never could. And strangely enough, I think he wanted the same thing from me. And so, dutifully, my new stepfather, he coached all of my teams: baseball, basketball, football, competitive German. Just kidding, I wasn't ever into baseball. And guys, I don't know about you, but I have this incredibly painful memory, several of them actually, of being like 12. And the point guard, you've already heard of my basketball prowess, and the point guard of my mediocre City League basketball team. And I'm literally dribbling the ball up the court while I and my stepfather shout at each other for the entire length of the court, arguing about anything from like what I'm wearing to who I'm going to pass it to what we're doing after the game. You can only imagine that the group of parents that were there had like a front row seat to something that was just horrifying. And so obviously, this wasn't the first time we had engaged in this sort of behavior, and nor would it be the last, friends. And if this was the only part of our relationship, of our story, that you zoomed in on, you probably wouldn't come away with the sense that we were the cleavers at home. No, this scene is indicative of many other things, and if you just take it on face value, it's gruesome and embarrassing and impossible to look away from. Not maybe all that dissimilar than witnessing an ancient prophet of the Lord requesting bears maul a group of kids for making fun of him for being bald. Here's a live look in. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, again, your kids are getting all of this downstairs. It's very helpful for them. Yeah, enjoy the Olive Garden today. So, but as a therapist, I found that most of us are like, honestly, one screaming toddler or adolescent or stepfather away from requesting that the she-bears take it from here, right? Some of you have been to Walmart on the weekends. That's why you're laughing or crying. I can't tell. And so when we zoom out, though, and take like the whole of our experience and theirs into account, a different story begins to emerge. One about what happens when all of us live under the weight of an identity, expectation, tradition, or narrative that was never ours to begin with. Or, as one of my therapy mentors is fond of saying, next slide, please. Friends, we own our stories, or they end up owning us and the 42 kids nearby. Just a few verses before the passage that I read, we discover that Elisha has been given the impossible task of replacing his old boss, Elijah. Maybe you're noticing. If you aren't familiar, here's Elijah's baseball card. So Elijah of Mount Carmel fame. If you're not an avid reader of the biblical text, you wouldn't know that Elijah took on the prophets of a rival god, Baal, which, again, if you're searching for names of a deity that you're interested in, Baal is always great and available. So, but a rival god to Yahweh is the god Baal, and Baal has many prophets. And so essentially what happens is that Elijah challenges them to a battle royale atop Mount Carmel. You have to first go through the swirly-twirly gumdrop forest to get there, but once you reach it, it's beautiful. I thought the Candyland joke would be funnier. Maybe I thought it was just the first service. Maybe if I wait for the second service, it'll work better. It doesn't. I'm going to scratch that forever. So aside from that, so they get on top of Mount Carmel. They build 2 altars for each god. On one side, you've got Baal and his prophets. There's like 42 of them. And then on the other side, you've got just Elijah. Elijah then spends the rest of the day waiting on the prophets of the prophets of Baal to call down fire from heavens to light the altar there. And so the first god, essentially, to light the subsequent altar of their prophet, wins in this battle. So some of you are familiar with this story, so I'll move it along. The prophets of Baal, they cry, shriek, play instruments, give offerings, build megachurches in honor to Baal, and no fire lights the altar. And so then Elijah, in the world's greatest all-time religious burn, says, guys, keep it up. Perhaps your God is in the restroom. Give him time. Keep going. And so then finally they tire themselves out, and so Elijah comes in true WWE fashion, asks for stagehands to come and wet the altar several times, just adding more and more intrigue to the experience. And then he prays one prayer. Boom, thing lights up. That Elijah is who I'm talking about. The one who speaks directly to God as if God were giving him instructions and a list for things to pick up at Target. Elijah, the performer of not just this one, but many incredible miracles. Elijah, the prophet who never actually died, but was whisked away on a flaming chariot in front of all of his followers, and who even to this day has a seat left open for him at Jewish Passover celebrations. Yes, that Elijah. And then there's Elisha. Next slide. Whose only claim to fame is that his name kind of sounds like Elijah. You've got to be thinking to yourself here, was there not a Brandon available to be a prophet for the Lord? I'm sure there's one in the food court. Just keep looking. So in verses 11 through 14, right before ours, we then discover that immediately following Elijah's heavenly ascent, he leaves behind his cloak or his mantle, which is this hairy sheepskin that would have identified him in the ancient world as a prophet or holy man. And so if you're tracking along with us, just after the smoke is cleared from Elijah's heavenly blast-off, Elisha then picks up his old boss's clothes and literally puts them on in front of all of his followers, which has got to make you think that jersey retirements are really just an act of mercy for everyone left on the team, right? So after putting on Elijah's old number, his followers then press Elisha over and over and over until he finally relents and allows them to go look for Elijah elsewhere, because they believed that once Elijah went up into the sky, perhaps he came down somewhere else. So they just wanted to be sure. I mean, you can almost hear it. Yeah. You know, Elisha, you're great. Gosh, we're really excited to turn this page and start this new chapter with you. But can we just double check that your old boss isn't still in the building before we start the meeting? Gosh, there's even an ancient Jewish commentator several hundred years ago who's probably just piling on at this point, but who goes on to mention that Elijah was, in his words, particularly hirsute or hairy, while Elisha was, as you remember, bald. There's a theological term it's kind of a technical term you might not be familiar with to describe this experience, but it's brutal. This story is brutal, and we're not even to the she-bears yet. And so for a while, Elisha tries his best to fill in his old boss's sneakers. He parts a river. He heals the poisoned water in a nearby village. But you can, even in the text itself, you can kind of feel the tension starting to build internally until, of course, she-bear apocalypse. Let's see it again. See, it's just right there, ready to happen. Yeah, again, this is a live look in. Your kids are getting this downstairs. It's going great. There's no tears down there. I hope your beepers are going off. So, but friends, in my experience, personally and professionally, you know, we can fake it for a while. Sometimes a long while. Sometimes we can even make it to retirement. But attempting to be someone or something we aren't will eventually do violence to us and those we care about and those around us. Best case scenario is someone buying an ill-advised Corvette at your age. 13th century rabbi and mystic Susha of Hanipol, you're familiar with his work, had this to say about his own midlife crisis, probably just before bringing a boat home that didn't fit in his garage. So he said, "When I die and stand before the heavenly judge, I will not be asked why I was not like Abraham or Moses. To such a question, I could provide a very convincing answer. No, when I die, I will be asked only one question, the answer to which will determine whether or not I take my place in the world to come. Why was I not Susha? And to this, I will have nothing to say at all." Some of us learned pretty early on that the world is crowded and that opportunities are scarce. And that it has no need for someone with our particular ideas, personality, beliefs, baggage, gifts, and embarrassingly loud laugh. In this kind of world, the only way to make it for most of us is to become someone else for as long as we possibly can. Sometimes I found the people that we come from, our families or our communities, they taught this to us as if it were true, reminding us overtly and subtly that who we are, gosh, doesn't really measure up. And then at the end of the day, why can't we be more like our sister? Or that kid down the street who's good at math? Or Elijah, why can't we be more like Elijah? We should go look for him. You know, maybe he came down. Other times, we learn this about ourselves from our bank accounts or our home values, or our GPAs, or our physicality, or our jobs, or the performance of our kids on their traveling sousaphone teams we have that magnet for on the back of our van. Somewhere along the way, we picked up that we aren't enough, and that really, why can't we be more like Elijah, or at least that mom with a blog and a messy bun and a multi-million-dollar lifestyle brand? She's just so real. Her Instagram proves it. That's what I'm saying. Thanks for laughing. That got me for some reason. And still other times, friends, we learn this about ourselves in church buildings from pastors and priests. We picked up that our life and choices and identity and story and family don't measure up to God's extremely lofty standards. And because of that, God and his followers are incredibly disappointed with us. And that at the end of the day, why can't we be more like Elijah or even Jesus? Growing up, I even had a bracelet that I wore that reminded me daily of just how much I would never do what Jesus did. It was the 90s. It was kind of a big deal. All of us make mistakes. Cargo pants, for instance. Some of us are still making that mistake. That's okay. You know, I used to wince, guys, when people would talk about God as a perfect father. That kind of language, while well-intentioned, is incredibly heavy for all of us with family baggage to bear, especially, around the holidays. And so later on, I found out, luckily, that perfection, even in the Bible, honestly, isn't actually about getting through this whole thing unblemished or unscarred with all A's on varsity. That it's actually about being whole, complete, and so okay with yourself that it makes enough room for others to find their very own okayness too. Some of you know people, some of you are people, that when you enter into the room, it's like there's just more light and air in the space. It's like people can finally figure out who they are. It's like they have room to kind of tell jokes or let people in or open themselves up. Some people just have this kind of personality that it's like this space-making experience for them. And other people get into the room, and they are so fundamentally not okay that it's like all the air's been sucked out. Hypothetically, it's like you're at the Thanksgiving table, and all you can see is that wobbly can of gelatinous material that we call cranberry sauce just shaking on the plate, and that's all you got because all the air has just been sucked out of the room because there's so much not okayness in the space. Jesus, because he was Jewish, I don't want to blow anyone's mind here, but he was Jewish, and so he called this kind of okayness shalom, which means peace or harmony or completeness. And it was the word he was actually using when he reminded the large crowd in front of him that they should be perfect just like their heavenly Father is perfect. They should be whole. They should be radically complete, even with their limp. Just like the God who wholly, radically, and completely loves them and you from your bushy eyebrows to your pointy elbows. Friends, it took me 25 years to realize that when I let my stepfather finally be who he is, and not some perfect replacement for someone who wasn't much around, I was able to discover a man who imperfectly cared and loved a kid who wasn't his own flesh and blood. A kid who was sometimes moody and oftentimes difficult to get along with because he was a teenager, hypothetically. And he didn't even call down any she-bears in the midst of all of that. And sometimes, friends, that's a miraculous move for any of us with children. That's like the baseline miracle, is that we don't call down she-bears in the middle of the thing. He never did it. You could say that I spent 2.5 decades being angry with him for him not being someone else. And he spent 2.5 decades sticking around anyway, because that's what real dads do, even if they're imperfect. In becoming okay with him, I actually found that I had some okayness left in the tank for myself. And now, as a dad, I get to try and give that kind of radically imperfect okayness to my boy, even if he yells at me for asking him to come to the living room and talk about how he's feeling. He's going to love being the child of two therapists, is what I'm saying. He's already in love with the idea. I don't want to talk about how I'm feeling. He will be disappointed I'm talking about it now. Friends, in all its weirdness and violence and just bizarre kookiness, we probably have a bit more in common with this story and the she-bears than that tired line about doing all things through Christ who gives us strength. Because this story is real and bloody and about what it means to suffer under a misplaced idea of who we're supposed to be and what life is supposed to be about. The good news of the Christian story, the best news, maybe, is that on the other side of whatever blew up in your face, like on the other side of whatever went wrong, like where you lost it and you didn't think you would ever recover, like you just went out somewhere and you never came back, that on the other side of that, you get to keep being a prophet of the Lord anyway, even if you lose it and call on she-bears to maul children. You still get to be a prophet of the Lord. That's my favorite part of the story. The Bible teaches us that God is always on the lookout for prophets and pastors and priests with blood on their hands and tears in their eyes. And if somebody told you something else about the Bible, they weren't telling you the truth. In the kind of world we now inhabit on earth in 2018, maybe the most important thing you could do is to stop trying to live your best life. And instead to take a few tentative steps towards radical okayness with who all of us actually are or aren't, what we can or can't do, and where we are or aren't right now in our career or our parenting or whatever Oprah means when she says things like self-realization. I still to this day do not know what she means. It's one of her favorite things, and I want to find out, but I do not know. We are in desperate need here on earth of more limping prophets, pumping radical okayness out into the atmosphere. We need trees planted to convert the carbon dioxide of toxic partisanship, perfectionism, consumerism, addiction, and shame into grace and peace and light and oxygen for communities in desperate need of such things. To be clear, I'm saying your life isn't a brand. So stop curating it and start living the thing, even if it looks goofy online. Because, friends, when we own the stories that we've been living under for years now, rather than having them keep owning us through the service entrance of our souls, the ground around us cracks open at our feet. Dead things come back to life. The resurrection in the Bible isn't just about how Jesus rises from the dead. It's about how a life, a relationship, a sense of who you are that you thought was gone forever, miraculously comes stumbling out of the tomb again along with him, rubbing its eyes in the harsh light of the sun. Resurrection is about Thanksgiving. It's about when you go and you sit at that table with those people and you always know how it's going to go. You always know that when that topic comes up or that person comes up or that thing shows up, that things will get super awkward and tense and violent. And at that point, you're going to think, I wish there were actual she-bears. That, friends, in that moment, it's ripe for resurrection. It's ripe for you to believe that at this moment, the only thing that when Lionel's talking about trust, the only thing that you can trust is that somebody came back from the dead thousands of years ago. And if that can happen, then maybe your Thanksgiving can be resurrected too. That maybe your family can be resurrected too. That maybe your sense of yourself can be resurrected too. That maybe this thing that you lost a long time ago that you thought, man, I just had to bury that thing because no one was ready for it. That thing gets to come back from the dead too. That maybe neighborhoods in your city, they get to come back from the dead. And not just with like cool restaurants, but like actual like life-giving things for humans that live there. Resurrection is about trusting that even though the world that you see right now, the raw data in it, doesn't add up to something beautiful and life-giving, that it could come back from the dead. And you thought we were just talking about she-bears. However you end up answering the question of who you are, or where you're going, or what you believe about any of this, if you don't hear anything else, just this, please. I've found in myself and in my own life that God has a habit of sticking around, even when I reject him, misunderstand him, ignore him, put words in his mouth, request he send she-bears to all my enemies on the internet, or lay him in a tomb. Friends, God always comes back because that's what real dads do, even if we sometimes call them step-parents. Because I occasionally dabble in the mainline tradition, which is like Presbyterians, Methodism, Episcopalianism, there's usually robes and stoles and voices that sound like James Earl Jones from Star Wars. And so I don't always get into it, but one of the things I really love is that they say a benediction. And a benediction is just the combination of two Latin words, bene meaning good and diction meaning words, and they just ram them together. And literally it means saying a good word over y'all, because I'm from East Tennessee. And so I wrote one for you today to carry with you on Thanksgiving. And so if you are so kind, I'd like to read it over you. Would that be okay? Thank you. Yeah. I'm going to raise my hand because that's what I was taught to do. Just go with me. So may you, Sparrow Day, and all the humans that inhabit it, in the face of curated Instagram perfection, unflinching anxiety about the future, and the outsized expectations of the families you inhabit, put your faith not in a God who is bigger, better, and louder than the rest, but in one who keeps showing up even after we've killed him, and one whose prophets sometimes swear when they step on Legos in the middle of the night. And if that sounds like you or something you might be interested in, I would love to hang out with you after this whole thing is over with. And I'm sure other people at this church would as well. Thank you for making a hospitable space for me. Thank you for being with me this morning. I wish nothing but grace and peace over your cranberry salad this weekend. In the name of Jesus and his resurrection, amen. Thanks, y'all.